10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hello, welcome to episode 11 of Your Brain on God. In today's episode, we are in part 3 of our Fear series. And what are we talking about today, Aaron?
We're going to be talking about shame.
We're talking about shame.
What a shame.
The way shame affects our lives and our relationships, and also some ways vulnerability is required in order for us to step into deeper connection with others.
Amen.
Amen. So, sit back, listen in.
Relax. Get some popcorn and enjoy the episode. Welcome to Your Brain on God. Episode 11. Come on now, everybody.
Yes.
Welcome to episode 11 of Your Brain on God. My goodness, we are excited to be with you. Excited to be little dolphins in the
great wide
in the vastness of the ocean. I will tell you something.
Ocean of life.
I will tell you something. I admire the ocean more than I do the galaxy. I'm just going to be honest.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. I always felt mad at myself because when I looked at the stars, I didn't really care.
You felt mad at yourself because you didn't care about the stars.
I didn't care about the stars. Like everyone seemed to just be like, "Oh, the stars." I'd be like, "They're just dots." Like,
interesting. I love this. I love looking at stars and space and the galaxy.
yeah,
I get amazed often thinking about how big everything is, how much space, and then also just about space itself, like the space between the stuff. Mm-hmm. Because it's nothing.
Right.
It's so interesting.
Yeah. Have you heard I think it's like quantum physicists that talk about just basically the entire universe, even like matter is just nothing.
Even matter is nothing? Yeah. Nothing matters.
Which all means that nothing matters.
matters.
No, because even in an atom, most of an atom that makes up things is all empty space.
Right, yeah.
Right? So you have like your I guess your nucleus, and then your protons, your electrons, and all those spinner
but there's all the space around them.
But there's
in comparison to how much stuff they actually take up.
Right. Yeah. So the actual there is more space than actual stuff.
Oh, for sure.
In our universe. Like of everything that's made up in this table, even it being solid, there is more space in this table than there is solid matter.
So you're saying there's more space in the table than there is table in the space.
Exactly. There is more. There is more of nothing than there is of something in this table that we are sitting at right now.
Isn't that fascinating? Now think about that in the galaxy.
Yes. We were just talking about before we even started recording, like the actually of space. What happens when you would go into space and then I guess your breath would be sucked out of you and you would just freeze?
Yeah, because it's nothing. There's nothing. Like you can't. No sound will be traveling because sound travels on air. You can't hear anything out there. It's just silence because there's nothing to carry the sound,
which is crazy.
You know? And there's nothing to carry heat. Or whatever, so everything it's gone.
Right.
My friend, I think it was like last week, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about being in space, and he was talking about how terrible it would be to die in space because you would just be filled with the void. That's what he said.
Filled with the void.
Because you would essentially be filled with nothing because everything that's inside of you is going to be sucked out of you by space.
Jeez.
Your lungs will be filled with the void, and it's just
over for you.
It's over. I don't even know what would happen.
Yeah, I really don't know what would happen.
Supernovas are really cool. I love the idea of supernovas. Stars get so big that they collapse on themselves and then they explode.
What the heck is that, dude?
You know what I mean? Because they get so big, they get not necessarily the size, but it's the gravity. They start generating so much gravity that they implode. And when they're big enough, when a nova, whenever it implodes strong enough, it explodes. Supernova.
Ain't no nova strong enough.
A regular nova usually becomes a dwarf star. So it'll shrink and then it'll become like a
A little star.
A little star. But a supernova will shrink, implode, and then explode.
I want that to
Stardust.
happen to my body. Dude,
In what way?
If there is a way to go, it is for me to implode on myself. To have so much gravitational pull around my body because I am such a force in the world with the Holy Spirit that I eventually implode and explode.
You want to implode and explode?
I thought
You could.
I thought that's what a supernova did. It
Well,
only
a supernova
implodes.
did. Yeah, but it could, and a star could just implode.
That's what I'm saying. I want a supernova. I want to implode and then explode over the world.
Yeah. I wonder if that actually happened to you, how much force you would be, how much force would exert from where you were. Because you won't be there anymore, if we're honest.
Yeah.
And if you like create a crater or something.
Yeah,
Because that
but-
would be a lot.
Well, my spirit would go up, is what I'm thinking.
And you'd watch
My
it happen
spirit, and I
from
would
above.
I would watch my body go,
Oh my. Yeah.
and I would explode, preferably in front of my family.
You got a twisted mind.
No, but
Twisted
okay.
mind, yeah.
I watched this movie Peanut Butter Falcon.
Yeah.
Peanut
Good
Butter
movie.
Falcon, and it's about this. It's Shia LaBeouf, and I don't know who the guy's name is or whatever. But this guy has autism, and he basically finds Shia LaBeouf, and Shia LaBeouf is a crab fisherman, and it's awesome. You should go watch the movie. Definitely in my top 5 movies of all time now. Actually, it's a really good movie. Anyway, he doesn't know how to swim. The autistic kid, so Shia LaBeouf takes him across the water,
Right.
and then he asks Shia. He goes, "Am I gonna die?" And he goes, yeah, of course you're going to die at some point. It just matters if you have a good enough story to tell when you do.
Right.
You know?
Yeah,
Yeah. And I love that part, you know? So I figure...
That would be a story.
I figure if I'm going to go, for generations, you know what I mean? I don't know how many, maybe 2 generations at least, you know? But if
People
I died...
telling your story?
If I died in a supernova, I'd be talked about
As a supernova.
If I died as a supernova for generations, I would be talked about.
Yeah. Oh,
I
you'd
would-
be talked about for a while. You'd
I'd
go
have
down
a
in the history books.
crazy legacy of dying, of imploding and exploding on the world. And my family would be traumatically messed up. Some serious PTSD. That's so funny.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of how that would happen, like at a Christmas gathering, spontaneously. Aaron implodes and explodes.
Just eating a cookie, having a conversation with somebody, and then it's just like, just right in front of them. Honestly, anybody that I was around, if I exploded on them, they would probably die as well.
They probably would also go. You'd be the man who imploded and exploded on his family.
You know what's cool though? I guess I'm just gonna talk about movies, but I watched Star Trek 2, and they have red matter in Star Trek 1. I haven't seen the Star Trek movies. I just started watching them.
Yeah.
They're really good. And it has red matter, and it creates black holes.
Right.
Literally, the red matter falls, and then it basically explodes, and it creates a black
It explodes
hole.
and then it implodes.
Yes.
That's a black hole in theory is how they got created.
right.
I think it's from supernovas. An explosion's so large that I don't even know how it works. It opens up so much space that it closes in on itself. Like if you have water, I don't know if this is at all true with science. This is what's happening.
But
in my
talk
mind.
about it, Daryl. Talk
So
about
this
it.
is what I'm-
Our
this is what I'm
listeners
gonna
need to
say.
hear this.
So you know how when you have water and you put your hand over water and you push down and you create a bunch of space, right? And then
Yeah.
the water comes and closes on itself.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And it kind of splashes up.
Right.
So I think whenever a star explodes, it happens. That it creates that opening in outer space, and then it forces itself on to close, and it turns
Jeez.
into a black hole. I'm pretty sure something like that.
Right.
Is how the theory of black holes.
Hey man, it doesn't matter if
That's the
it's
theory
true,
of black
Daryl.
holes. It's not. It may or may not be true, but
Hey, go look it up. Honestly,
it sounds good.
but it definitely sounds good, and it sounded smart to me.
Thank you.
Sounded really smart. Well, welcome to episode 11.
11.
11. Well, we did 10 and a half, so technically that was 11. So this is technically episode 12, but we're going to call it 11. So welcome to episode
Yeah.
11.
It's episode 11, but it's our 12th episode.
Exactly. That's a trip. Anyway, it's episode 11, and we wanted to continue our fear series, part 3 of Your Brain on Fear. And today I'm really excited to talk about what we're talking about. We're talking about shame today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a big topic.
It's a big topic. And
only more recently, actually, I think.
We might need Your Brain on Fear part 3 and then make this into 2 parts.
Part 3, part 1, and part 2.
Because
part 1, part 3A.
Part 3A. And then part 3B. We might have to make an entire organizational structure around this, because shame is a really big topic, and it's a thing that is very common to just humans in general. The experience of shame is a common experience to everybody. And it actually, for me, I didn't even think I had shame. And then doing a little bit of digging probably showed that I had way more shame than I thought that I actually had inside myself. Just probably in the last year or so, I was like, oh my gosh. Because I would hear messages, go to church, and people would be like, you know, God frees us from shame. And I'm like, what's shame? I'm like, I don't even think I deal with shame.
I don't have shame. That's a good point. I think that we can be experiencing it and not know that's what that is.
Right.
That's interesting.
That's why we got to define shame. So we want to talk about shame because of just the gravity that it has on our lives. I think that shame it gives us a sense of identity based on the experiences that we have in our lives. Oftentimes those are negative experiences that we build, identities around ourselves that are, I'm not enough, or I've done this, or the things that we do become who we are, right? And so oftentimes when we make mistakes, those things end up becoming somewhat attached to our identity, and we can live in a sort of, in a shame cycle,
Yeah, I think if we were to tie it into fear, in the first part of the series, we talked about fear being a mechanism of protection.
Yeah.
Right? It's a mechanism of protection, trying to keep us safe. Talked about the biology, what happens when when we feel fear in our body and we're afraid, everything goes off inside of all the hormones go out to make us more ready to either act and fight, or to run away and flee, or just to freeze.
Right.
And all these things change inside of us in order to get us ready to survive when we feel fear.
Right.
And shame is fear in a social context. Right. It's not a fear of a physical death necessarily, even though, in some countries, yes, you could be punished for doing certain things they would say shameful. In
Japanese cultures, defeat is shameful.
Yeah.
So they would kill themselves.
Right. The samurais. Yeah. And it's not necessarily about the physical death nowadays, so much for us probably, but
not in America at least.
Not in America at least, yeah. And a lot of, I don't know any Western culture that I don't know. Never mind.
Yeah,
I won't comment on that. But it's not so much about the physical death, but a social death, right? A social dying, a social pain that we're trying to avoid and protect ourselves from,
which is sometimes worse than physical death.
It can feel that way.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's experiencing, doing something, and then Brené Brown says that it's the intense and painful emotion, right? I'm gonna mess this up.
She says
a few definitions of shame.
She boils it down to the fear of disconnection, or the fear of not being valuable or worthy of love.
That's what it is. She says the intense emotion of not feeling valuable or worthy of love, and it's because of that disconnection in society, right? So the separation, I guess, that's created when you do something that's like it creates this whole separation pattern, which is terrible. Yeah.
So I just looked it up real quick. She said, I define shame as the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging.
Right.
So she has that definition of shame. And I think that is a very common experience. Now, if you guys don't know Brené Brown, she's kind of been leading the way in a lot of shame research within society. She's been a researcher for a long time. I don't know how many decades.
Yeah.
But she's been
2 at least.
researching shame specifically, I think since the early 2000s.
Right.
She's written books on it, the experience of shame. That's not the name of the book, but she's written books on the experience of shame, the way it looks in our culture, the way it looks in a workplace, the way that we experience it ourselves. The first book that I read by her was Daring Greatly.
Daring Greatly, yeah.
Yeah, and she goes through it and talks about how prevalent shame is in society.
Right.
She didn't, and it wasn't about Western or Eastern or society. It was just society in general. And she was talking about America, the way that shame shows up in schools, the way shame shows up in families,
Right.
in the workplace, how shame has been used as a tool to get people to behave a certain way.
Right.
Kind of like fear, right?
Right.
Fear can be a tool to motivate people to behave a certain way, right? And shame, I think, is a nuance of that. It's a certain type of fear that we are putting into somebody to behave a certain way.
Exactly. Yeah, and it sucks. Can I just say that? That doesn't sound very academic, but
I concur.
But it sucks. You know, it's like it's where your flaws. What she said. It's knowing that you're flawed, and then that saying something about you.
About
right?
who you are.
About who you are.
You are flawed,
right?
And therefore unworthy of love and belonging.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's different than just feeling bad about something, right?
Right.
It's different than making a bad mistake and being like, I shouldn't have done that. You know what I mean?
Right.
Let me go change that. It's when that mistake becomes who you are. Right? So that thing that you did, that terrible deed, that sounds old language, but you know, that terrible thing that you did, you become terrible because of the terrible thing that you did. And then you hold yourself accountable, right, in your own self for the mistake that you made. Right?
Yeah, where now this is who I am. Right? It's not just something I did, it is who I am. And I think she draws that distinction between guilt and shame. That guilt is about what you did. I did this thing and it was wrong. And shame, she will define more as I did this thing and this is who I am.
Right.
Because I am flawed. Because I can't do this. I'm not good enough.
Right.
You know? And I think that the separation between guilt and shame is important to make because the feeling of guilt doesn't have to be accompanied by shame. Right? We can feel guilty about something and think, you know, I was wrong. I should have done something differently.
Right.
You know, I should have done that differently, or shouldn't have done this, or I should have done this. Not that we should be using shoulds all the time and shooting all over ourselves.
Yeah.
But
Got him.
But the experience of guilt isn't something necessarily to be avoided, where shame maybe only causes further destructive behavior.
Right.
And this isn't just in Brené Brown's research, but some other research I was reading was talking about how guilt doesn't necessarily lead to more destructive behavior, but shame often does.
Right.
Because the feeling of shame is about if I am this,
right,
I'm not worthy of love and belonging. I guess we have to first establish we long for connection, right? As people, we long for connection.
Right.
And if I'm afraid that I did something and now I'm going to lose connection, I might try to do something to hide whatever I did.
Right.
So that way I'm not exposed.
Right.
So that way whatever I did isn't discovered.
Right.
Because I want connection and I'm afraid that if I am discovered to be this thing that I feel like I am,
right,
I will not be accepted. I won't be loved. I won't be worthy of love. I won't be worthy of connection.
People will see me differently. They won't like me. They won't hang out with me. I won't have a place, you know, I won't have a place in society.
Yeah.
I won't get this job. You know what I mean? I won't get a wife, you know, I won't get a husband, whatever. I won't have a family. All of those things. You could trickle down in a bunch of things, all of because of who I am, you know? And it does cause destructive patterns because you'll notice in any addiction, what keeps you in addiction is shame about your addiction.
Right. Uh-huh.
Right. So the freedom from addiction it comes from accepting, okay, excuse me, I'm addicted to this thing, right? And I want to grow out of this addiction,
Right.
and then stepping out of this addiction. But shame, and it's tied with maybe some, I mean, in a spiritual language, condemnation. You know what I mean? Of just being like, oh man, I'm so terrible. This is who I am. I'm always going to do this.
Right.
I always mess up. I always go back to the whatever it is. Insert addiction here, right? And living in that shame actually it perpetuates a cycle of destruction, of disconnection. You know what I mean? Because you find yourself disconnected from your own self, right? So there's like the shame in yourself, and maybe that's from society too, because just addiction is like a bad thing in society.
Yeah, I think that you can have shame for being addicted to something.
Right.
If within the society, it's bad to be addicted to something, right? Because shame is about the social environment.
Right.
It's about my feeling of whether or not I can belong in this place, right, and be accepted.
Right.
And so if I become addicted to something and I believe that whatever this thing is going to make it so I am no longer loved, I'm no longer lovable, right? I'm no longer worthy of being connected to.
Right.
Then I would become ashamed of that behavior, right? And that's when shame sinks in, is in that moment of, oh no, if people find out, if people knew who I am, they wouldn't love me anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And they wouldn't trust me anymore because I am untrustworthy.
Right.
And that shame that can creep in keeps us often from being honest and open about it.
Right.
Right. Because we feel guilty about it and we feel the shame that we're going to be disconnected.
Right.
And so rather than trying to tell them about it directly, we think, okay, I'm going to do this. I could get over it. I'll try to solve this on my own.
Right.
Right. I'm addicted to this thing, but I can do this. And so we try to create walls and shelter ourselves from the rest of the world and try to work on our own problems by ourselves, usually ending up going deeper and deeper into the thing we're trying to get over.
Right.
And all this shame is isolating us. Right. So we're afraid of being isolated from community because of this behavior.
Right.
But the shame is causing us to isolate ourselves.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. I'm not worthy of this thing. I'm not even going to try.
Right.
I am a terrible person. I'm not even going to be around this person or these things. You know.
Because what you fear is what you manifest. You know what I mean? Or like what you fear. Manifest is a very, again, maybe a Christian word.
But when you fear, you almost bring to be.
Right, exactly. And so you fear disconnection from society, so you end up isolating from society, you know? Or you fear people not loving you, you know, for experiencing that. And so what you create is, I'm an unlovable person, you know what I mean? So like you'll foster relationships that aren't full of love. Right? Because you think that's actually what you're worthy of. I think it's like that movie, another movie for The Perks of Being a Wallflower or whatever. It's like, we accept the love we think we deserve. The teacher tells her that. And because I think she asked him a question like, why do people get in these like relationships or whatever? And it's a really cool line. He says, we accept the love we believe we deserve. Yeah. Right?
That's deep.
That's deep, right? And that's the same thing. That's the same thing with shame. It causes this. It's terrible, man. It causes this idea and this identity that we create and who we are, and then it causes us to live hidden. Right? Because if I again, like you said, if I actually show people who I am, if they actually get to know the real me, if they actually see the struggles that I have, the problems that I have, the addictions that I have, you know, what I'm actually facing, what I'm actually thinking, if they actually saw that, they would not accept me. Right. Yeah. And so we stay hidden, and that hiddenness creates it creates destruction, but it creates isolation. It creates loneliness. It creates depression. It creates more anxiety and more heaviness. It doesn't actually allow you an outlet to share what you're actually thinking about, what you're actually going through, you know, what you actually are experiencing or addicted to or whatever. And so you're not actually vulnerable with people. And so you end up, what happens is you start getting bottled and bottled and bottled and bottled. And then you're living in this constant cycle of like, you know, it's just, and then eventually you'll explode.
You implode and then
you will
explode.
explode. Coming back to the supernova, you become a supernova. Yeah, when you live in that in that shame, you know, and it's a very hard it's a hard thing to live into and to start changing, because I think the healing, and this is partially what Brene Brown says about shame, is it comes through radical vulnerability, right? Openness and honesty with people, and we don't like that a lot of the time. We are uncomfortable with actually accepting our own selves, right?
Right.
And that's why we deal with the shame, in the first place, because it's like, you know what I mean? And then we have false identities about ourselves that we're bad. It comes through a place of like, hey, I'm laying it all out on the table, accept me or not. You know what I mean?
Right.
Here it all is. Here's all my garbage. Here's all my trash. Here's all the struggles that I'm having. Here it all is. You can look at it. You can cipher through it, whatever. Here it is. It's right on the table, And a lot of time when we do that, that is the most uncomfortable thing to do, but it's also the most healing thing to do, to live in that space of openness, because that, that cuts off the power that shame has over you to remain in that hidden place.
Yeah. And she uses the word of armor, like we put armor on, right? So shame, the feeling of shame tells us we need to armor up, right? Put on this armor so you're safe, so people can't, so you won't be hurt, so you can't experience this pain that you're afraid of experiencing.
Right.
We cover ourselves in armor, right? We do all kinds of different things to put armor up. We create a facade. We tell a different story. We say we're feeling a certain way when we're really not feeling that way. Right. We try to ignore certain feelings that we might have and convince ourselves, oh no, I don't actually feel that. I feel this. I believe in this, right? Even though we have something inside of us that's really hurting.
Right.
And I just had this picture come to my mind. Like if we went, say we have if I had a really messed up back, my back is really hurting. So I had sore spots and my muscles have all knotted up, and I needed to go and get a massage. And I was wearing all this armor because, my back was really sore. I didn't like it when anything touched it. Right. So I just keep this armor on my back, right? And if I go in and try to get a massage, they're going to need me to take my armor off.
Right.
So they can actually get to where the pain is and bring healing.
Right, yeah.
Because to bring healing through a massage, you have to push on the knots, and it hurts sometimes.
You're so pastoral, Darryl.
But it brings healing and restoration, right? Whenever you can actually take the armor off, and tend to where the pain is,
right.
But instead, I think often we just let it fester, right. There's my mom is a massage therapist, so she was a massage therapist, and me and my younger siblings, we'd give each other massages all the time when we were little, because my mom would practice on us. She would give us massages. And so I grew up loving massages. And it's always so interesting to me whenever I find somebody who says that they don't like massages. Right. Someone's like, oh no, I don't like getting a massage. Because it hurts. Right. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, well, it hurts because you need a massage. Right. Exactly. You have really bad knots that need to be worked out. And it wouldn't hurt as much if you had a massage. Right. And I had a friend when I was in college, and he was like that. He was like, oh, I don't like massages. And I was like, are you sure? I was like, I think you're just really tense. Let me work on your shoulder just for a second, and and just sit through it. And I promise you're going to feel better afterwards. Right. And so we were on a bus because we had to go to a conference that we're serving at. And so I was giving him a massage. And at first he's like, oh no, I don't like it. Right. Really uncomfortable. But eventually he actually asked for massages later on, after he was used to it, after he kind of felt massage, he's like, oh my gosh, that actually did help. I actually feel better. Thank you. And he became more open to having massages. Right. But he was so against it and averse to it because it hurt when it got touched. Right. And so vulnerability is that it's allowing the pain that we're experiencing to be exposed. Right. So it can be healed. Right. Because we try to cover it up. We try to, no, don't touch it. It's fine. No, don't worry about it. No, right. I'm good. Right. Oh no, I'm good. Yeah. But it's the experience of actually saying, you know what, I'm actually not good. Yeah. That one brings healing and brings connection. Right. Because it's the vulnerable moments that build relationships. Right. Right. That's what increases intimacy. Yeah. The connection that we have with one another. Right. The moments that we decide to show up and be vulnerable when it's scary and when it's hard. Right. Because shame will tell us all these make up all these stories as to why we shouldn't tell them, right? Oh, I shouldn't tell them because they're not going to want to see me anymore. I shouldn't tell them because they're not going to accept me. I shouldn't tell them because I'm going to be kicked out of this, the friend group or whatever.
They're going to be angry at me.
Me. It's going to cause so much trouble. So we continue to live this pseudo relationship,
right?
Kind of like community of projections, our third episode. We just project something that we think people are going to accept,
right?
But we are not actually accepted, and the relationship that we have is not actually authentic,
right? Yeah, and it is a scary thing to do that. You can, well, let me say this first. You can live that way.
Yeah,
I mean, he can live with the knots in his back. Right? Without you massaging him. But it's so much better when it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that I had all this tension inside me. And then it's like, it kind of hurt for a while, but now my muscles are used to it. You know what I mean? And it's something that you actually work on to get more and more open and vulnerable with people. But again, coming back to this thing, and this is something I'm learning a lot more, you have to be open to the full spectrum of life in order to experience. In other words, in order to experience the fullness of joy, you have to experience the fullness of
pain.
Of pain,
yeah,
right. And you have to experience hurt in order to experience hope. You know what I mean? Like you have to experience the full spectrum of life. We have been given life in wholeness and totality. Mm-hmm. Jesus comes and he says, "I have come to give you life to the full, life abundantly." Yeah. You know what I mean? And I don't think that just means like all of the good stuff and none of the bad stuff, right? I think it means that we actually get to experience life in the full. With all of it, right? With I don't know how many times I'm going to say this in a different way, but what I mean by is actually stepping into that, because when you share with somebody, hey, who you actually are, you may be received with disconnection, right?
Right. Yeah.
You may be received where they're like, "Are you kidding me? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I can't hang out with you. You know what I mean? Like, or I don't want to be." And that really is our fear, because we stay as far away as we can from pain and from disconnection and from hurt in our lives, right? And so actually getting vulnerable and taking off the armor, what is that? What is vulnerable? It means you're vulnerable to attack. It means you're vulnerable to disconnection. It means you're vulnerable to the words of others, to the decisions of others that may be harmful. Right? And so we don't want to live like that, because we want to protect ourselves as much as we can from the pain of life, especially in shame's sense, most often of the time in social pain, right?
Yeah.
But in being vulnerable, you have to be open to being hurt. Mm-hmm. and we don't often like that, but that's how we live full, because if we are open to being hurt, oftentimes, probably, especially if you're in a good community, 90% of the time you open up, with yourself, and you're like, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. This is what I'm going through. This is what I actually think about this. And people celebrate that, right?
Yeah, it's worth celebrating.
It's like, and a lot of time people will be like, "Oh, you too?" That was actually healing for me. Your vulnerability actually is healing for them and what they've been hiding and feeling like they can't feel as well. So you have to be open to hurt in order to be open to the good, the hope, the joy, the peace, all of that stuff, you know? And that's what vulnerability does.
Yeah, and I don't think we should, we're not painting a picture that if you're vulnerable all the time, everything is going to go well.
No.
Because sometimes we can be vulnerable and it could go bad. We might have disconnection. Maybe we share something with somebody and they are really upset.
And people take advantage of us.
Or they take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or they don't want the vulnerability.
Right.
And so they're uncomfortable and they leave the relationship.
Right.
Right? And it's not always that being vulnerable will lead to immediate connection with the person you're being vulnerable with.
Right.
Because sometimes it takes time for there to be healing if it's something against somebody else. Right. And I think what matters more than that is that you become a healthier person by practicing vulnerability.
Right.
Which means even if certain relationships don't work out because you were vulnerable and they decided not to honor that and they didn't respect it, or it was a bad experience, you as one practicing vulnerability can build stronger relationships.
Right.
If you're in a place where you're comfortable with that. And obviously, we're not talking specifically about vulnerability right now and healthy vulnerability, because there are boundaries, there are healthy ways to open up and to disclose information. And there are times when it could be good to, and it could be better not to certain people. And but the practice of being willing to take down our armor with safe people, right? I think that's important to emphasize. With safe people, generally with safe people who love and accept us. Whenever we open up to them, they're gonna love and accept us.
Yeah.
Right. And if they don't, that might not be a good relationship
In the first place. That's exactly what I was gonna say.
Yeah, it might not be a relationship that you want to be in.
Right.
If you can't be honest with things.
Right.
And it's not as an excuse to just word vomit everything, but you want to have safe people you can open up to.
Right.
And in those moments, it feels very risky. Right. It feels scary. We have all these outcomes in our mind of what could happen.
Right.
But there are so many times in my own life when I chose to be vulnerable with safe people, and it was the most healing thing that I've done.
Right.
And it was a restorative thing. Right. Met with way more acceptance and grace than I thought it would be. And it even creating more connection. Rather than the disconnection that I was fearing. So when we can practice this, and it takes courage, and bravery to do that, practice it with safe people, it furthers and benefits our relationships. The thing that we're afraid of losing can actually become so much stronger. Right? The connection, the fear of disconnection, that it goes in the opposite direction so often. And it's not something that it's not worth being afraid of, because, there is a risk. We don't necessarily know, you can't predict the future. But it takes a level of courage and of trust that this other person sees you and loves you. Right.
And it's better to live like that and be hurt than live isolated and lonely and never making genuine connections with people and never seeing the good in people. Because what happens is when you get into that silo too of shame, you start actually creating different things of other people that aren't even true as well. Like that person would never accept me, or like they don't even like love me, or like, they're doing this wrong, but it's all comes from shame, like all that judgment of other people or shifting blame and stuff. Often all of that stuff is from feeling like there is a problem with you. The world that you see is a mirror of yourself. Right. So
that's good.
Oh, that is good.
Did you get that from somewhere?
No, I made that up. That's good. Yeah. But this is, or maybe my counselor told me. I don't know. But I'm like, I just want to take credit for myself. No, but the world you see is going to reflect what's going on inside of you. Right. So the relationships, if you are closed off because of shame, if you are, ashamed of yourself, you think that that you are wrong, that you are bad, that there's something wrong with you. Guess what you're going to see in other people? What's wrong in them, how they're bad, how they make mistakes, how they mess up. Why? Because you're seeing them through your own lens of how you feel about yourself. Jesus says this. He says, judge not lest ye be judged. And I kind of read that, don't judge people because, the only judgment comes from God, but also in another like psychological way, the judgment that you pronounce is the judgment that's already inside of you. Why is there, crazy Christians that say, hellfire and brimstone or whatever? Because they actually believe that about God, and they probably judge themselves really harshly in how they live, right? No one like gets to that point where they're just like, wow, God, you just like accept me and love me, and they're like, and you're damned, No one really gets, there if they've received like the grace of God, because he first loved us. We can have grace for people because he had grace for us. We can, not judge people because he's not judging us. We can not condemn people because he's not condemning us. All of those things, right? So whatever's inside of you. So it affects all of these different things, like what's going on inside of you, how you're seeing other people, how you're seeing yourself. And so along with vulnerability, and I think this other thing helps vulnerability, is radically accepting yourself and being okay being where you're at. And this has helped me a lot, because when I get unhealthy, I go straight into perfectionist mode. And I have a tendency to focus on what I'm not rather than the good that I'm doing or what I'm growing into. And that can cause a significant amount of shame about the thoughts that I feel still, or I'm sorry, the thoughts that I think still, or the feelings that I still have about things, or maybe the things that I still do wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those things can create a shame of like, oh, I can't believe I'm still living into these things, right? And I have a tendency to focus on where I'm not, when I get unhealthy, at least. And so radically accepting yourself is really important for shame, you know what I mean? And not isolating, because if you can accept yourself, then you can present yourself to somebody else, even if they don't accept you. It's like, well, I accept myself, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And furthermore, even stronger than that, God accepts me, So that radical acceptance and being present with the current thoughts, the current reality, the current addictions, the current, the current sins, the current, whatever space that you're in right now, confront those things. And this is another thing that Brene Brown, she quotes somebody, and this is in her book Dare to Lead, and I may be daring greatly as well, but it says, the cave that you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek, right? Mm-hmm. So and I kind of take that as the feelings that you fear to actually feel, right? Or the thoughts that you're afraid to get up close to, right? Those things actually can uncover who you are, right? Like like. And I had this dream a little while ago where in the dream this dark sheet, I guess it wasn't a dream because I was like awake, so I guess a vision of sorts, but this dark cloud came over top of me, and it was like this black sheet, and it just kind of came right over my body, and I like pierced through it, like almost like a hot butter going through a knife. Yeah, hot knife going through butter, and I pierced through it, and it was very strange, And I felt like God actually spoke to me in that moment and said, the darkness can only show you that you're light, and it was like, whoa, that's crazy. You know what I mean? Yeah. And to me, what that meant to me is the shame that I enter into, those feelings of shame, those feelings of darkness, those things that I'm afraid of that are actually inside of me. If I actually get up close to those things and embrace those things and accept those things inside myself, I'll realize, whoa, that's not who I am anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those fears, right. We have a culture today that says what you think and what you feel is who you are. And I disagree with that incredibly, right? Yeah. Right. And so we're oftentimes afraid of the things that we do, the things that we think, the things that we feel or whatever. We're afraid of those, and we're ashamed of those because we think it's who we are.
Yeah, we're afraid of being that.
We're afraid of being that. Yeah. So if you radically accept yourself and say, man, that actually is inside of me. You know what I mean? That bad thought is inside of me. You know what I mean? That bad action, I did do that. You know what I mean? Right. And you own up to what you're thinking, because what we do is we try and run away. This is us over here, and we're running away from all of the shame, all of the fear, all of the guilt, all of the condemnation, all of this stuff. So we're running away, and then in running away, it just follows us for the rest of our lives. But what happens is when you actually stop running and you turn towards it, right, and allow that stuff to sit with you, and this is the dark cloud analogy, you know what I mean? You start to come out of that, and you start to see the truth of it, and you're like, whoa, I'm actually good. Those thoughts actually aren't me. I actually don't care about that. I actually don't want to do that again. I'm actually good. And that is a hard thing to do, along with vulnerability, because it takes intense, incredible uncomfortability and openness to be hurt and maybe find out truths, you know what I mean, that you're afraid of,
And that reminded me of another study that was done. And whenever we feel that we've done something wrong, right, we want to do the right thing, right? If we feel like we've done something wrong, we think, oh, I should do it different, or I want to do it this way next time. If we believe I am something wrong, then we don't think we can do it a different way.
Right.
Right. Tony Robbins says that we act congruent with who we believe we are, who we believe that we are. So if I think I'm this way, I'm more likely to actually continue to act that way. Right. And the study that was done at a college campus where the researchers told the students that they're doing something and they're going to try to see how common cheaters are on campus.
Whoa.
Right. In a test. This is about like tests and stuff. And then there was another group of students where they said, we're going to see how common cheating is on campus.
Whoa.
So they changed the word from cheaters and identity, right, to cheating, right? Cheaters is a noun. That's a title.
Right.
Cheating is a verb. It's an action.
Right.
Right. So what they found was in this group of students who were involved with the word cheating, where the word cheating was used, the verb, the action, they actually were more likely to cheat.
Wow.
The group where the researchers said, we're looking to see how common cheaters are on campus, they were less likely to cheat. Because it was
You mean cheating? The one without shame or the one?
No, the one about cheaters. The one that's tied to more of an identity.
Oh.
If the group of students were told that they were looking for cheaters, they were less likely to cheat because they didn't want to be associated with being a cheater.
Right.
But if it was just about seeing how common cheating is, they thought, I can cheat and that's okay. Right? I'm not a cheater. I just cheated.
Right.
So this idea of identity being so closely tied to our feeling of shame.
Right.
It's about, I am this.
Yeah.
And Brene Brown poses the question, is it more helpful to change behavior by tying someone's identity to something they've done?
Right.
Or is it less helpful? Because if we're telling them that this is what they are, then they're less likely to change.
You're a liar.
Exactly.
You're a cheater.
You're a liar. You're a cheater.
You're a murderer.
They're more likely to behave that way, right? If that's who they are, why would they be any different?
Yeah.
But if we were to separate them from their action, the behavior is more likely to actually change. If they themselves wanted to change.
Right.
If they thought they were a cheater, they were less likely to stop cheating. You know what I mean?
Right.
But if they thought that, they cheat sometimes and they thought, well, maybe I shouldn't cheat, it was easier for them to change the behavior.
Right.
Because it wasn't tied to their identity.
Right.
To this fear of, I'm going to be seen this way.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, you could see it when something is tied to your identity, you probably want to do it less, right? Because the feeling of that actually being who you are is a really scary thing.
Right. I don't want to be these
and
things.
it's funny that they did cheat less, but it's probably not, it's like Brene Brown said, it's not the most helpful motive to not cheat.
Right.
To say, well, if I cheat, then I am a cheater, and that I'm going to be wrong, and like people are going to look at me differently, and I'm not going to be accepted, and I'm going to fail at school. You know what I mean? Like all of that different kind of stuff. Like I don't want to do good because of the shame of being bad.
Yeah. Right. Trying to avoid the bad thing.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And this is often how we train up children. And I've kind of been, I don't have a kid, so I'm not, in it. So I can't speak into it too much as far as like what should be done, just because I don't have that experience. But what I've seen and what I've been kind of learning is we do that a lot with kids, in order to, we train them that like to feel bad about something that they did so that they don't do it again.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or
Shame
that it could
tool.
get tied to your actual identity so that they don't. And so we try and, use those tactics, to get them to change their behavior, right? And like we read in a study before we started, that if kids grow up in that, they're more likely to continue those patterns of shame and guilt into their adult lives.
Yeah.
And oftentimes the only reason that we do good is because we don't want to feel bad.
Right, yeah.
And instead of actually believing that something is good and valuing integrity, valuing honesty, valuing, safety, I don't know what another one is, I can't think right now. Instead of valuing those things, we just, our value kind of gets limited by our desire not to feel shame and to be ostracized by people. Mm-hmm. But living out that, it usually just perpetuates a falseness about who we are, right? Because the things that we do aren't actually based in what we actually believe. They're based in fear, right?
Yeah.
So you actually start changing your behavior out of fear, out of not wanting to feel shame, instead of actually, whoa, inside of me, I feel that this is right. You know,
Right. Yeah,
I want to do this. And so you have a bunch of people living by maybe values that aren't their own, you know, or just trying to run away from bad feelings, right? And doing things according to that, but they're not actually genuinely that way. And you see this a lot in the church. And I think this is a big reason why there is a lot of hypocrisy in churches that you see today, is because often, and there is an aspect to changing, you know, your behavior and living like Christ, but the way that we do it, the way that we're, at least I wasn't necessarily, no one would actually tell you like, use shame to change, you know, to change. Like no one actually say that. But the idea that I got growing up in church was, if I feel bad enough about something, you know, then I'll change my behavior.
Shame to change.
Shame to change. Yeah.
Right.
Instead of falling in love with God so much and him actually changing my heart, and that being the reason that I change.
Yeah.
That being the reason that I make a different decision, not because I'm trying to run away from disconnection with God or disconnection with my Christian community or disconnection with myself, but because I've actually been transformed to believe that loving people is valuable, that not stealing is valuable, that not cheating is valuable, right? That taking care of the poor is valuable, right? And so I start to actually really become a person that lives according to those values, rather than somebody running away from condemnation and the judgment of hell if I don't get my life together.
Yeah.
Right. And that could be, oh boy.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
There's one last thing that I wanted to say that came to mind, I think right before we started recording, but shame. So we're talking about fear, and fear being an innate response, right? It's kind of like an automatic response to a situation that we want to avoid or get out of. Shame is a response, an automatic response to keep us connected. Ultimately, that's why we feel shame, is because we want to stay connected to people. Right. So we lie about something, we try to cover something up. And this experience of shame is a tool to try to keep us connected to people. And ultimately, it's a subpar tool, and it leads to brokenness so often, and destructive behaviors, and more behaviors that we feel ashamed of.
Right.
And it usually leads to disconnection.
Right.
And when we feel bad about something, like this feeling of guilt, we don't have to feel shame about it. Right? Shame is a response where it says, I feel bad about this. If somebody knows about this, then they're going to find out, and then I'm not going to be accepted anymore. I'm not going to be loved, not going to be cared for.
Right. Goes way too far.
Yeah. So this feeling of guilt is okay, right? We do something, we think, oh, you know what? Next time I want to do that different.
Right.
Rather than going to shame in that moment, we can go to vulnerability. And it's that moment of feeling bad about something that we decide how we're going to move forward, right? Are we going to let shame sit in and try to cover this up and be afraid that if anybody finds out, they're not going to love us, not going to care about us, and try to do that thing that feels safe, but in the long run is damaging and it's destructive?
Yeah.
Or in that moment when we think, you know what, I messed up, we can choose vulnerability, show up with honesty, and allow ourselves to be seen, so that we have the opportunity to actually be connected,
and
to actually be accepted, to actually be loved. Right. And in her studies, she talks about people who lived wholeheartedly, Brené Brown, and Darren Greatly. She says that the people who lived wholeheartedly, so these are people that she dubbed that title for them, because the way that they lived was lived out of their whole entire being, right? They lived wholeheartedly. The thing that they had in common was that they all were convinced that they were loved and lovable, that they were accepted and worthy of love by at least one person. And that allowed them to live wholeheartedly, to be vulnerable, to be honest, to be courageous. But the people who struggled with shame were the ones who were questioning that, whether or not they are actually worthy of love. And in that moment of guilt, we don't need to tie that to our identity. Right? And instead of choosing shame and falling into shame, the kind of automatic response, we can choose vulnerability to move toward deeper connection. Right? To move toward further connection. And so in those moments, I mean, I want to be more aware of that in my own life. When I do something like, oh, dang it. I can have an automatic response to things. Oh my gosh, if this person's going to think this person's going to think this.
Right.
I'm just going to try to avoid it. I won't say anything, or,
Right.
I'm going to just wait. Maybe it'll be brought up another way.
Right.
And when it gets brought up another way, usually it's more damaging than if I were just to bring it up, right? Directly.
Yeah.
And this feeling of shame is so sneaky, the way that it works, right? It's like, well, maybe it's okay if you don't say anything,
Right.
But in that moment when I'm like, oh, I did the wrong thing, I have the opportunity to choose to be vulnerable,
Right.
to make the courageous decision, to show up, to be honest, and to pursue connection
Right.
in those moments, right? So those moments of guilt are opportunities for deeper connection. They don't have to be opportunities to lose connection, opportunities to be disconnected and unlovable, right? They don't have to be connected to our identity.
Yeah. To perpetuate a lie. They don't have to be used for that.
Perpetuate. Yeah, exactly. Those moments of feeling bad about something actually can be a catalyst for deeper connection.
Right. Yeah. I love that. The fear of disconnection keeps you from the possibility of acceptance. From the
Of being truly accepted.
Yeah. And that's what it really does. It's this tool that we use to not be disconnected that causes disconnection. And we talk a lot about those double agent things. Shame is one of those tricky. Yeah. He's a tricky one. That's
a tricky one.
It's one of those double agents that says if you hide, if you don't tell, if you just remain, in that hidden space, no one will find out, and you'll remain connected with people, and they won't, they won't reject you. But really, it does the exact opposite, right? Because you never allow yourself the privilege of someone knowing you and seeing you in all of the crap. You know what I mean? Because it's like, it's one thing to be accepted because you're just a rock star. You know what I mean? You're an all-star.
Yeah.
But when they see all the junk, they say like, yes.
Right.
You're like, it's like, it's a breath of fresh air. I was going to say that earlier. It's just like, oh my gosh, are you serious? You know what I mean? And I've been asking myself, the question, are you sure?
Right.
It's like, you really mean it? You accept me with all the junk that goes on inside my mind and all the things that I do to escape and all these things. You really accept me? It's like, yeah, you're safe. And it's like, you know what I mean? There's this lightness that comes when you step into that vulnerability and you open yourself up, both for the opportunity to be hurt, but also, and more likely, for the opportunity to be loved and accepted on. Because I think most people would want the same for themselves. You know what I mean? To be able to, share with somebody and then. And be accepted in that moment. And guess what? If the person doesn't, they're probably dealing with their own shame. They're probably dealing with their own stuff. It's like if they hold that against you and start making tallies of how many times you messed up and put you to shame and all these different kinds of things, like I said earlier, they're just mirroring what they feel in themselves, and they're treating, they're treating you how they're treating themselves. So even you can have compassion and grace on that person, even in that moment, knowing, hey, this person has probably struggles with shame too. You know what I mean? Yeah. Maybe I should go to somebody and talk to somebody that deals with a little bit more compassion and mercy. You know what I mean? And I think there's one final thing I want to say too, is like, is with God. I think, Adam and Eve in the beginning, in the garden, they sin, they eat the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and God comes looking for them, and it says that they were ashamed and they covered up, and that could be like equivalent to Brene Brown's idea of putting on armor, right? Yeah. That they had to clothe themselves. They were ashamed at their vulnerability. They were ashamed at their nakedness. They were ashamed at their exposure, that they were open. They were conscious of themselves. And so what did they do? They ran, they clothed themselves, and they hid from God. And then God comes in the garden, and he comes looking for them, which I think is such a beautiful picture of the actual gospel, of God's heart towards us, is that all the time that we're running in shame of who we are or who we might be because of shame, God is running after us. He's walking after us. He's asking, where are you? I want to still have a connection with you. And I think the beautiful thing with shame too is because people's responses to you are going to vary. Oh, like, depending on the person, depending on the situation, depending on what time of month, day that you reach them at, if they had a good day or a bad day, their responses to your vulnerability or towards you being your authentic self is going to fluctuate. But the beautiful thing about relationship with God is that doesn't fluctuate. You know what I mean? Like, I can go at any moment in any time and connect and not feel shame before the Father because, one, he already knows every bit of darkness that could possibly be inside me, every addiction, every lie, everything. He already knows that stuff. And he's already said yes to me. Right? So a lot of times it's a question in our minds if someone's going to be like, yes, I accept you.
Right.
But with God, it's something different. You can go in knowing that you've already received a yes, right? That you've already been accepted, that your shame has already been done away with because of what, Jesus did on the cross. And I think that's really powerful because if you start to live from that place of acceptance, knowing that you're always valued, that you're always accepted, that you're always, you're always seen, you're always loved, that's what you're going to manifest in all of your relationships, because the relationship you get from here, vertical, is going to affect the horizontal relationships in your life,
Yes.
So to not let anything get in the way of those or pervert your mind to think that that's not God's heart for you as well. And if you are listening to this and you think that's God's heart towards you to put shame on you and to, be a taskmaster and make you heavy and tell you all the things that you're doing wrong, get off. I'll step off my, what is it called? Soapbox now. Yeah. But there is no shame that we have to be afraid of with God. And that gives us courage to be bold, to be vulnerable, to accept ourselves, and then, to be vulnerable with other people so that we can receive acceptance and that connection with others as well. Yeah, super good.
That's good.
Dang. That was a good podcast. You guys know it. Oh, man. You guys are awesome. Thanks for joining us on episode 11 of Your Brain on God. Make sure to follow us on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, Your Brain on God on Instagram. We'll be back next week for you guys for the fourth part of our Fear series, which we don't know what it's going to be about yet, but we love you guys. Yeah.
Love you guys.
Mucho
Be
love.
blessed.
Mucho
Be blessed.
gracias. Mucho gordo. Bless you. Peace out.
Peace out.